When you hear the name Obsidian, you think of a number of things. RPGs, in-depth story, exposition, detailed writing and choice, and branching narratives, to name a few. And looking at the entirety of their career as a game developer, some of my favorite games have been made by Obsidian. And all of these games, specifically the Pillars games and Tyranny, embody these features and the philosophy that goes into them. But one thing that Obsidian has never really had is what one could only call mass appeal. Obsidian, for better or worse, has always been niche, or niche adjacent if such a word exists, and their ideas, concepts, structuring, and the implementation thereof has always been on a relatively small scale. Now, people at this point will be quick to bring up a game such as Fallout New Vegas, and yes, New Vegas is probably the one game, the only game, that Obsidian has ever made that even approaches what one might call AAA, and or captured mass appeal. But you have to say that with a lot of caveats. The first and most important caveat was that New Vegas was made in the wake of Fallout 3, a very popular game made by Bethesda with a fair bit of mass appeal, and even though the roots of Fallout go back to before Bethesda had acquired the property, it nonetheless was a huge boost to the popularity of the game. To date, Fallout New Vegas appears to have sold over 11 million copies since its release, which is nothing to sneeze at, as it is just behind Fallout 3, which allegedly has sold over 12 million copies. But both pale in comparison to something like Skyrim, which has sold over 60 million copies. Sure, people praise the writing and the story of New Vegas over any of the other later Fallout installments, but it didn't sell as well, which you could ascribe to the short development time of a year and a half, or something else entirely. Now don't get me wrong, 11 million plus games sold is a feat, but especially with the sales expectations of today, it doesn't really cut the mustard. And when we look at the sales of other games Obsidian has made, both past and present, they are even more modest. Their most popular game after New Vegas is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, with just under 11 million sales since its release in 2003. And when you look at even more recent games, such as The Outer Worlds, they've done better with a net revenue of just under 11 million, according to Steam Revenue Calculator. But these types of sales are within expectations, as generally speaking, Obsidian games sell in smaller numbers, with Deadfire having sold around 7 million in total since its release, according again to Steam Revenue Calculator, and Pillars, the first game, has not even broken 2 million, allegedly, and of course this is just on Steam. So you'd probably have to look at GOG sales as well, and to a lesser degree, console sales, to get the total picture. Obsidian games sell well enough, depending on your perspective, but they're almost never blockbuster hits, with near universal appeal, and that has some important reasons behind it. Obsidian is in many ways a product of their time, having stood still in many respects. Their roots hark back to a time when games were all about being interesting, thoughtful, rich in detail, in the sense that the worlds have full histories, cultural landscapes, and are alive in a way that you only rarely see these days in modern games. Exposition and reading are key, and complex RPG mechanics such as stats, different races, class builds, and similar elements are historically what made Obsidian stand out. But all these things also make Obsidian rather old school in their approach and tactics, and most salient here is the point that Obsidian tends to develop games of small to medium scope, i.e., at the end of the day, Obsidian was, and forever will be, a AA studio. Now mind you, that is not a condemnation of Obsidian, or of AA as a category, as scope and size are not the only factors that go into making a game good, and most of my favorite games of all time are AA. In fact, Obsidian fairly recently made this clear in an article in PC Gamer titled, "Obsidian says it won't chase huge profits or grow aggressively, and that's how it's going to last 100 years in the RPG business. Are we serious? Yes." Obsidian's 100-year plan isn't, and I hope this isn't too disappointing, a decade-by-decade breakdown of future projects that end somewhere around Fallout Old Vegas. I'm assuming that pre-apocalyptic settings are popular in 2103. It's more of a thought exercise. But Morgan and Bridge said that they genuinely want Obsidian to continue beyond their lifespans. Are we serious? Yes, said Morgan. And why not? Nintendo was founded in 1889. One of the pillars of the plan is staying quote-unquote lean and invested, meaning small enough that none of Obsidian's employees feel like a cog in the machine. Morgan and Britch said that in recent years they've been considering opening multiple international offices, but in the end decided to partner with existing studios rather than risk weakening Obsidian's culture by getting too big. Among other things not mentioned here, Obsidian's plan includes building institutional knowledge by aiming for the lowest turnover rate in the industry, and continuing to release the kinds of games they're known for: player freedom, world building, all of that, at a consistent pace, not rushed, but often. Now that was from the article, but whatever you think about Avowed, and set that aside please, look at Avowed's scope. It is firmly a AA game, and even though Outer Worlds 2 is planned to be twice the size of the original game, it will also, in all likelihood, be a AA game, at least in the conventional sense of what people consider AA. And ultimately, I do think this is the right move, and Josh Sawyer, when speaking about himself, says this very thing when comparing, say, the soap operatic mass appeal of BG3 to something like Deadfire.
And honestly, after Deadfire, I don't really feel like looking at Deadfire and how it was received and looking at BG3 and how it was received, I feel like I don't have the pulse of that audience, even if I ever did. So whether I did 20 years ago or whether I do now, I don't think I got it now. Things that they like and don't like mechanically, story-wise, things like that. Or I do get it and it's not, I don't dig it. So I feel like I'm kind of out of touch with that audience in a way that, well, if you want to give me a pile of money to make a game, I'll make it. I don't necessarily think it's going to appeal to the audience, the same audience, and make that money back.
It certainly is true that over the years Obsidian has lost a good number of people, but there are still some good people working there. Several of them who were away have returned. For example, whatever you think of the Outer Worlds, and I have to say I'm not a huge fan of the IP, at least thus far, Timothy Kane, the original creator of the Fallout series, and John Gonzalez, who was the lead writer for New Vegas, have returned to work on that game. So independent of genre and other factors, it could end up being a better than average game just because of additions like this. Sadly, the real powerhouse of Obsidian's former might, Chris Avellone, will almost certainly never return. A, because of personal differences between him and the CEO of Obsidian, and B, having been falsely accused of licentious conduct by two women against whom he successfully filed a libel lawsuit and won, with the women publicly retracting their claims and accusations and then settling on a large amount of money. But even after having been exonerated, his reputation has been unjustly tainted, and he really has only been working as a freelancer in the last couple of years and is unlikely to be admitted to work on anything major, and certainly not at Obsidian. Now, Chris Avallone's mark on all the games he's worked on is very noticeable, as he is one of the best writers, if not the best in the industry, but sadly, we'll never see him working with Obsidian again. Right now, Obsidian is a mixed bag. On the one hand, you have the likes of Timothy Kane, John Gonzalez, and Josh Sawyer, and on the other hand, you have people such as Matt Hansen, and those like him. But regardless, I do believe that with the right people, it's still possible to put out good games. Pentiment is a good example of this. It was a small project, but praised for its plot and story. And I actually do think at the end of the day that AA is the proper route for Obsidian, provided they have the right talent working on these AA games. Obsidian, even in its heyday, never really had mass appeal, and the mass market has always continued to elude them. But I don't see that as a bad thing, quite the opposite. If they can buckle down and focus on their strengths, with the right people, I think there's potential for some really solid, if not great AA titles in the future. And of course, just like many of you, I'm really hoping that Pillars of Eternity 3 is one of them. But in any event, thank you very much for watching. And if you like my content and you like my takes, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It's much appreciated, as it really helps out the channel. And I'll check you out next time. Take care.